We are so excited to have Will Puckett, or Wheeliam Puckett, however you know him. Some of you may know him from the Seattle area where he grew up, down into the Tacoma region, and then he went from property to property for much of his career, spanning about 20 years. So I think 15 or so was spent in the Seattle market. And then about 5 years ago, he jumped over to Texas, where he's currently still in this industry, working in the maintenance or as a service manager down there. And he's learned a lot along the way, and he has a great, really, mission or personal value into the industry because of his personal experiences. So I'm excited to hear more of his story, and let's welcome William to the show.
Hi,
All right,
everybody.
William, how's it going? And
All
do you
right, man.
prefer Will or William?
Will, when people call me William, I think about getting in trouble.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it. I won't call you that.
all right.
But Will, it's been fun to get to know you. We had a good call a few weeks ago and learned a little bit about your story, and I'd love for more people to know about it. Um, because obviously there's a lot of people that have worked with you in the industry, but maybe they don't know what drives you personally when it comes to the work you do. And so if you could just start really with the origin of how you got into this and why you fell into maintenance and service, being a service manager and all, that would be awesome, because I know it actually has more of a personal origin.
Yeah, so I grew up in I guess, the most impressionable years. I grew up in Tacoma, and I grew up on Hilltop, and I grew up on the east side of Tacoma. For everybody that's from Tacoma knows what that means. It's a rough place back
Yeah.
in the 80s and 90s. And we lived in a lot of places that weren't really kept that well, and sometimes would be embarrassed to bring people over to our house because of how it was not kept so well. Sometimes having to go without heat in the wintertime because they weren't kept so well, and having to figure out different things. At that time, I think Section 8 had a really big stigma to it, and you were afraid to put in work orders as residents because it seemed every time you put in a work order, it made things worse for you. And
Mm.
so growing up in that way, I my dad was a maintenance man actually for some daycares, and he would always tell me idle hands are the devil's playground. So he would take me to work with him all the time, teach me how to do anything that he could teach me. I was probably 11 the first time I put in a bathroom floor. I was probably 13 the first time I painted a room, just things like that. So I'd been exposed to it for most of my life. You accompany that with a lot of other influences in my life. My mother and her wife, my other mother, we had to work on cars, and just everybody around me doing everything they could to keep my hands busy and keep me occupied to try and keep me out of trouble.
Mm.
And so you fast forward to when I was 18, I had great influences like my Uncle Jerry, who tried to teach me how to stay on that straight and narrow path and to make sure that I took care of home. And so I took care of home to being a different meaning. And so I wanted to learn how to take care of others people's homes. So when I was about 18 or 19, I started going to college, and I actually went to college to be a mechanic, but I had a really unique opportunity to work at a property that was a storage facility as well as an apartment complex. So they provided 24-hour maintenance, basically, not emergency maintenance, but there was always somebody on property. And so I got to work the night shift there doing grounds and doing kind of a courtesy patrol thing. There was shortly after that another property that allowed me to be a courtesy patrol slash grounds porter. And I was doing that while I was in college. And then on weekends, I was working at this mechanic shop. And when I worked at this mechanic shop, it just wasn't as fulfilling as I expected it to be. So when I was done with college, I decided to stay with property management. And early on, the property management companies that I were with were little mom and pop shops. And at the time, I didn't know, really naive, but I didn't know I guess, the way that a maintenance man should be treated. I've always been treated, you go out there, you do your work, home, get done. And then the first company I worked for that was a really reputable company was Riverstone Residential. And so while I was there, I had a great lead, Colleen, that helped me perfect the craft. And she's really what helped me fulfill my dream of being able to help people and realizing that I wasn't just fixing people's houses. I was helping people maintain their home. And that started early on as a really big drive for me. And so then you fast forward a few years to I was working in Issaquah at the first tax credit property I'd ever worked at. And there was a bunch of small properties placed here and there or whatever. But coming where I came from and how I grew up at the time, there wasn't any of the development that's going on in Tacoma and Hilltop now. There wasn't any of the nicer townhomes being put up. I don't know if you're familiar with that area, but Salishan, before it was revamped, was small duplexes that were basically sitting on cinder blocks.
Yeah.
And so the first time I worked at a tax credit property, I remember looking around and just realizing at that point that just because we grew up a certain way or just because we were maybe more impoverished than other people, it didn't mean that we couldn't have less of a life to live. And so working at that first tax credit company, I was really blessed with the experience. And the meaning behind it was so powerful to me because I saw people essentially that grew up the same way that I did that were able to sleep at night and feel safe and be proud of their home and be proud of what they were doing and what they were trying to accomplish. And it was a step to help them get out of the cycle into something bigger and better. And it really opened my eyes to a huge thing. And so from then on out, I was given I was given the opportunity through experience just to be able to start kind of handpicking the places that I wanted to work at. I was in a situation where I had gotten good enough and was comfortable enough and knew enough people to where I could pick and choose what property I wanted to work at. So I would search out the properties that I felt that I could help the most. And I would work at those properties to try and just achieve the same level of success by giving a sense of pride back to a community and helping develop a sense of pride for the community and helping to make people feel better about their situation and realize that it wasn't the end of the line. So many times now we see where people sometimes get stuck in the same rut and they feel like they're never going to get out. And so I felt like this was a very unique opportunity to be able to help with my specific skill set to help people and make them feel better about their situation and keep a sense of pride in them. Because once you lose your personal sense of pride, there isn't too much left for you to lose. And so it was always my mission and dream to continue to improve their circumstances in their life. And I always felt like being able to go to a place and call a place home was the first stepping stone of that.
Very true. And I think it's awesome that as you got more and more into your craft and your profession, really seeing it as an opportunity to help people have a better experience than you had, regardless of their situation, whether it's a luxury apartment or tax credit or affordable, that everybody has, or should have the ability to enjoy where they live. The landlord is still collecting rent. And
Right.
so they should provide a living situation that is something that the person that lives there is proud of, not like you felt like I don't want my friends to come over. And I know people that have similar situation where they tended to not have people over because I don't want them to see how the building is that I live in. But yeah, it gives people a sense of pride. Same is true for a lot of things. I think it's true for even like when people go to school and their school isn't very nice. They don't have any pride in that. So it's plays in all that. So it's awesome that you're doing that and have done that. And you shared that you have received a few awards being recognized in your work ethic and also exactly how your mission personally has played out in your professional life. So what are some of those awards that you've gotten?
The most recent one is called the Cornerstone Award, and it's for being an integral part of how a property runs behind the scenes. Because as a service manager, the way that when I first entered this business with some of the great mentors that I had, my job as a service manager wasn't to be just a maintenance guy saying, hey, we got to do this, we got to do this. It was paying attention to our budget, paying attention to the not only things getting fixed, but how they were fixed. Did we diagnose those problems? Did we make sure things were done in the specific order they needed to be taken care of to make it done the right way, not just to be fixed, but to be fixed where it will last in this right way.
Yeah.
And that's the most recent one. I've won a couple maintenance man of the year type things for the same thing, how hard I work. I got my CAMT. They're actually I've gotten awards for training, so all kind of stuff. Because I feel like when we have people that work with us, right? When we work with a team, number one is that we are only as good as the people that work with us. Nothing that I'm able to accomplish is possible without my team. And so it's always been another mission of mine to make sure that my team knows as much or more than I do so that they're able to climb the ladder, so to speak, themselves. Because it's been really interesting where we've gotten into a situation with maintenance guys now where training is more readily available, training is more advertised, training is more sought out. And so being able to be that part and teach people how to do those things, diagnose and find out exactly what's wrong instead of just replacing things is probably one of my biggest joys right now. And that's all because of the awards that I've gotten and then the mentors that I've had. Just showing me a manager that I used to work with named Jessica that we worked together in that tax credit property I was telling you about. And one of her big passions at the time was training. So I got really lucky with her for her to want to show me some of the ins and outs of the operation side of it because our thought process was that if I don't know how what I order affects the books, then how would I ever know how to keep my budget in track? And so
Yeah.
she was integral about that and training me. And she's what helped jumpstart my passion for training because we had only worked together for probably a year, but the amount of things that she had shown me in that year really shifted my focus on how I wanted to approach multifamily.
That's awesome. I'm glad you had those mentors because some of the past guests I've had, they've spoken highly of the people that have been in their life and mentors and how much that what other people put into them, how much that meant for them personally and professionally in learning more about the industry and even opportunities to move up and to get better. So it's cool that you're now giving back in the direction of people that are new and training them. So that's really great that you're doing that. So, one of the things that you did mention that is pretty important, and you touched on it a little bit, is just the importance of team. Being that you have a team on site, like what are some of your philosophies when it comes to having a team and your opportunities to lead people?
I guess the first thing is that you have to lead by example, right? So if I'm going to expect my team to do certain things, I have to be willing to do those things as well. And that's where I start with at first is just leading by example, showing them that I'm absolutely going to get down and dirty with them if we have to, no matter what. The second thing is again education and training. You run into things where certain things are going to take me away to go do something else, and I need to be able to know that my team is going to be able to handle the property when I'm gone. And the only way to get that is through training. And then I have three basic rules, philosophies for life in general. Just one is don't be late for anything. And that doesn't just mean like punctuality. If you see something needs to be taken care of, take care of it and beat people to the punch. If you know that you've made a mistake, own up to it and beat people to the punch. Don't be late for anything. The second thing is closed mouths don't get. We have a situation where if we need help, people don't ask for it anymore. If a person needs support, we don't ask for it anymore. If a person needs something that's going to get them through life and through home and through work better, they don't ask for it anymore. So closed mouths don't get fed is a really big thing for me because I can't help you if I don't know what the problem is. And I can't guess what the problem is, whether it be professional or personal, philosophical, religious, doesn't matter. I'll do everything I can to help. And it's my job as a person in general is loving my neighbor. And a big part of that is being able to fulfill those things. And then the last one is pay attention. In life and every situation that we deal with, we can find a lesson in everything that we do. Whether it's we've done it wrong, we didn't get it done all the way, we can find a lesson in literally everything we do. And if we pay attention, we'll see that lesson. And not only does that make us better at our job, but that makes us better as people in life in general if we truly try and pick up those lessons. And then last thing that I have to say is at the end of the day, all we have is our word. We say we're going to do something, we have to do it because at the end of the day, it's all we have left is our word. And if we break that, then as people, we have nothing left. And so it's always been a huge philosophy of mine just to do what I say I'm going to do.
That's a good thing to live by. And those were all great and appreciate you sharing those. It's great that you've developed personal mission and also personal values that you really stick to and live by that drive your not only your work but your personal life, that you see the value in like treating other people well, and even you mentioned love your neighbor. That goes a long way and we don't all tend to do that sometimes. And it obviously plays out well when you live that way when you're working on site at a community and you view each person as having value, that you're servicing their home or doing something for them. So that's really great that you live with that kind of intentionality and care for others. So appreciate you sharing that. And then something else that you mentioned was just some of the things you've learned about in the industry itself. And we were just talking a little bit before the show, and you were just mentioning COVID and how it's brought up the importance, highlighted the importance of people that are serving the communities in maintenance, and how you couldn't not be there, first of all, and you still had to fix stuff and maintain
Right.
things, and the buildings couldn't just let to go to pot. I guess tell me a little bit of your experience in the last few years and what that's been like, what maybe you've seen change when it comes to the attention you've gotten and things of that nature.
I think it has to start with the very, very beginning of my career because when I've seen this industry evolve from being basic thing where you go to Home Depot, you grab a flapper and you go fix it to what it is now. So that evolution over the last 15, 20 years has been absolutely amazing. We had trade shows, we have classes now through different supply houses that will help teach us things. But when I first started it wasn't like that. We got $1,000 or something per diem deal for the month, and then we got like a free apartment. And depending on what you held in the property, maybe you got free cable, free power. There were just different little things where a lot of it required, at least for my career, was learning how to do things myself. So, like an example is repairing appliances. I had been trying for 5 years to take a class to repair appliances, and I could never find one. I went to a supply house and bought some books, started taking home broken appliances to fix it and move on. And that's how most of my career went until it started to evolve. And but a lot of that evolution, at least from my point of view, was involving the office staff, right? And then fast forward to 2020, when 2019, 2020, when COVID hit, right? And all of a sudden, everything that we knew in this industry changed for everybody. The office wasn't doing any more tours. Some of the offices were all working remotely. Maintenance guys were half and only fixed emergency work orders for a time there because they didn't want us to have the least amount of exposure as possible. And so for us, we were having to figure out ways to keep the property running on site so that we were still able to have an industry because we saw things, at least especially here in San Antonio, where a lot of the jobs here are customer service based or restaurant based, where a lot of people were not working because there was nothing for them to do because of the situation. And so we were running into situations where our properties, all of a sudden, we didn't have the forecasted budget that we had to be able to maintain the property. And maintenance guys were having to figure out how to make it work. Over the 2 years or whatever that we had with COVID, it affected our supply chain. It affected the types of things we were doing. In San Antonio, specifically, labor is really cheap here. So a lot of people before COVID were having apartments being rented out to paint, for instance, because it was like, 150 bucks to paint a one bedroom apartment or something. And so for me, that really benefited me because when I first came to San Antonio, I'm used to Washington where we had to always paint our apartments ourselves. We didn't vend it out. And so it was something easy for me to grab. But during the time there were things we couldn't afford to do, I was able to learn how to resurface. A lot of maintenance guys were in a similar position. And so during COVID and after COVID, we started to be viewed as essential employees and essential workers. And people started to realize not that it was never a question whether a job was important, but how important it was. Here in Texas, we ended up having this crazy like snowstorm in February of 2020, I think. In this crazy snowstorm, for me, I was started buying parts a couple weeks before just because I knew what to expect from my experience up there. But a lot of people had no idea what to expect. And then you take that with once the snow started coming down, everybody started turning on their heaters because it was cold and it ended up overloading the electrical grid for the entire state. And just on the property that I was on at the time, we had at least 160 water lines break, if not more. It affected 100 to 120 units, if not more. And so, me and my team, we all actually lived on site at this property. And so, we were running around replacing what we could. We got to the point where we ran out of all the repair items that we needed that they had stocked up on. So, now we were reinventing the wheel. We were trying to make repairs with supply lines for hot water tanks or trying to figure out a way to put copper and galvanized together so that we could at least keep the water running, and ended up being futile at the end. By the end of this situation lasted for an entire week. And so
Mhm.
by the end of this week, we were out of everything. So now we were taking water from the pool and delivering it to units every day so that people were able to flush their toilet. We were bringing bottled water through the door as servicemen from the area were dropping it off. So everybody had drinking water. We were lining barbecues up in the parking lot out back so people could come heat water for coffee and soup. And we could to help get people along. And so after all this was over, the recognition that came to maintenance, the maintenance side of things for everybody, was a huge outcry and a huge support system that a lot of maintenance guys felt that they didn't have before, and felt like that now people are paying attention to us. Now our opinion matters. And so it was very interesting to see the transformation after COVID and where we are now. Because let me tell you, for everybody, I think that if you can definitely tell the difference between a property that had dedicated employees during this time to properties that didn't have dedicated employees. And the ones that were dedicated, those are the guys right now that everybody's looking to for leadership.
I thank you for sticking through all that because I know that especially having to deal with all the power and the water burst, and those are big deals. Like that affected everybody at that point. I can see why they would appreciate the work you guys were doing, but I know you were probably doing not to that extent, but doing a lot of things prior to COVID and also the snowstorm. It's good that you guys started getting a little bit more recognition. I served at a community in Washington State for almost 3 years and did events and things like that, but got to know the maintenance staff really well. And I always appreciated them. And as I got to see like how people live and the things that they had to go through and deal with, it just gave me an appreciation for people that are in maintenance all the more because from my perspective, it's like you rent an apartment. Now you may or may not ever interface with the office. Like if you don't go in the office or you don't have a need to talk to the staff until, you're going to renew a lease or something. The
Right.
people more than anything is really the maintenance. So how important are maintenance? Like hugely. If you don't have a good maintenance team taking care of the property, that affects greatly whether or not people want to stay at the community, right? If you don't have a good staff there, you're running a risk of losing people pretty easily. And I'm sure it affects online reviews and all that to a large degree as well. Yeah, you guys are important for sure.
We appreciate that. Across the country, we appreciate that.
You guys are doing great work. And I know right now it's been really hard to hire people in maintenance. So keeping your staff is a whole nother thing. So,
Well, and one of the, I think, for at least for my team and the people that I've had, I can honestly tell you that most of the people that I've worked with in the last 4 years that I've been in San Antonio, like most of the people that I've worked with have moved to bigger, better things where they're running their own teams or their own properties or their own things. I don't know that I've been in a situation, at least in the last 4 years, where I didn't have enough people on my team. Because my thing is, I would tell my teams, like, look, here's the deal: is if I haven't gotten you ready for the next step in your career within the next 12 months, I'm not doing my job. That step may be, but when I interview people or when I hire people, I look for work ethic, not experience. Because
Yeah.
I have somebody that I work with, and he's deserves a shout out. His name is Matt. He started out as a temp employee at one of the properties I was at. And it was the first time in the maintenance industry at all through this tip property, and it was a very difficult property. And he had come in, and all he was doing when he first got there was helping me do trash outs because this property had taken over, had probably at 40% occupancy, maybe 50, and all the units that were vacant had just trash and furniture left in them. So the first 3 weeks I was at the property, all I did was trash outs, and he had come on and help me. So you fast forward now, we are 12 or 13 months past that, maybe longer, maybe 24 or 18 or 24, but it was a very short time ago. And now he is an assistant service manager at a property that they just hired a service manager. He's been working there for probably close to 9 months now. And he did the first 9 months himself without a service manager, which is huge. And the only thing keeping him from being a service manager is he was waiting for training to come up. He's most definitely hugely capable of taking care of it. And he was able to do that in 24 months. And it had nothing to do with anything other than his work ethic.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
great.
when I hire people, that's what I look for is work ethic. I didn't teach you anything you want to know, but if you don't have the work ethic, you're not going to make it in this business because this is not a 9 to 5 job. This is not a clock in, clock out kind of deal. We have on calls, we have urgent emergencies that always happen in the last 10 minutes of the day. Never fails. And so somebody to have that work ethic and that drive in themselves to make it that far that quick is truly amazing. And I personally have been blessed with a lot of people just like that I've worked with in the last 4 years down here. And for most of the time I was in Seattle, same thing. Just a lot of people that were hired that had great work ethic and great.
It's great that you're able to find those people and be a part of their development because it's always fun to see people succeed and move up. That's for sure.
It is.
So, Will, thank you so much for being on the show. I have 3 questions that I wrap up with. Being that we're called Community Boss as a company, we like to know what it is you do to build community in your either personal or professional life.
Oh, I think the first thing is I have an insane love for football. It's absolutely insane. And I'm currently coaching my son's team, but I've always tried to be around like a coaching atmosphere, kids in the neighborhood. The first time I coached, it was in the very same neighborhood that I grew up in. And I remember how hard it was in that neighborhood when I was a kid. So being able to coach and teach kids that there's something outside of those same 20 blocks has really been huge for me. And I do that. And then as well as at least get the word out there about different charities. Like one of my favorite charities is out there in Washington. It's called Spirit Helping Hands. And it's a huge charity that has come a long way since they started just a couple of years ago. And they help with making sure that they can battle homelessness on some level by food donations, clothing, just things like that in general. But it's a great thing that they do and try to support them as much as I can just by getting their name out there. It's hard to support them from 3,000 miles away, but
Sure.
I believe in everything that they're doing. And
Yeah.
then the last way is just through my work, helping provide a sense of community for people by making them proud of the community that they live in.
Thanks for sharing those. Those are all distinct but also very important things. So, yeah, those are great. The next thing I like to ask is if you were to have somebody over for dinner, what would you cook for them?
Man, my kind of go-to is my grandma's chicken adobo. That
Okay,
is probably my favorite food ever. I'd probably want to cook that.
nice. And then finally, you're from Washington State, so you know all too well that we are a coffee hub when it comes to the world, but United
Right.
States for sure. What's your favorite coffee drink?
Man, I'm really kind of basic. I just like American drip coffee. Just
Yeah, me
regular
too.
Folgers and with some creamy sugar. That's it.
All right. Yeah. Hey, man. Easy to please. Well, thank you so much for being on Boss Talks with me. It's been great to get to know you more, and I hope we can stay in touch from this point forward. And if anybody else, just Will, jumped on Boss Talks, step maybe out of his comfort zone. Maybe he's never done a live before. Maybe he's never been on a podcast or anything, right? He jumped in, takes a little bit of courage, but I really do appreciate it. And I just want to extend the offer to other people that they too can be on Boss Talks, share what they're passionate about, what they view as a good way to lead. And I'd love to get to know you. So reach out to me and we'll do this.